The world is now under a serious pressure of transforming fast.
It was just like magic. There was the days before value stream mapping and then the days after the value stream mapping. And it's like this marker in time where my whole thinking about work changed.
Many people are busy but not productive.
The three main concepts of the book, value, clarity, and flow.
People might over prioritize perfection, and we all know the quote, done is better than perfection.
Are we going to end up in a better place if we pick a mark on the horizon and head towards it? Or if we just look down at our feet and step one step in front of the other?
Welcome, Steve. I'm so excited to meet you in person. Actually, that also meet you on the camera. But I'm so excited for this podcast. And congratulations for all the rainbows your book is going with. And for everyone else, Steve Pereira, he's a great techie. And more than that, he's the author of the great book Flow Engineering, which is going on all charts this year at least, and then many more years to come. So Steve, welcome to the show. Welcome to the Change Story. Please introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. And it's really wonderful to get this chance to talk about flow and the book and all these ideas, because I think that you're right about flow. Like there's something naturally fascinating about it, something naturally powerful about it. It really motivates us and drives the sense of achievement that is pretty rare, especially, I find in large, complicated environments, which is where we've sort of targeted the book. But because, I've been in environments where there's high flow and sometimes high chaos, and sometimes there's low flow and everything is stuck. And so it's kind of a valuable idea and a valuable investment everywhere. And that to me is a very powerful thing. When you can leverage one tool for many purposes, or a single focus that pays off at the individual level. And what we talk about in the book is at the collective level, like with teams and teams of teams, all these things apply. And so that to me is a win. It's a huge thing if you can learn something that applies in so many different contexts. So really excited to talk about it. And I've been fascinated with the subject for forever, it seems. And my whole career has really been about trying to unblock flow for people with technical jobs, but also I think, for any job now has a technical aspect to it. We're all engineers in the sense that we're solving problems all the time. So that's what I mean when I talk about engineering. When we talk about flow engineering, we're just about solving flow problems.
Right. And I mean, there's so many things right here. One, when you say that's what we do as engineers, people are just solving problems. And there's a phrase that we often use with our brand middleware is that many people are busy but not productive. Mm-hmm. So while people are solving many problems, but I mean, some problems are less important than others,
right?
And people might deprioritize solving for flow, and that's the essence, right? People might over prioritize perfection, and we all know the quote, done is better than perfection. So the idea of doing it comes from flow. So Steve, I mean, so many testimonials about the book. Many people are rethinking their processes after reading the book. But what was your, where did your journey start, and what sparked your idea for the book?
Well, my journey started, as far back as we want to go, but we don't have time. Like really, I've been involved in trying to remove friction in tech my entire career. I started as a kid fixing broken telephones and computers and helping my family and friends with tech support. And that was my first job, was tech support, was really trying
Yeah.
to solve these gaps between people and technology, right? Where things
Yeah.
are harder than they need to be. We have incredible solutions, we have incredible
Yeah.
technology, and everything is still very difficult to do, right? I mean, lots of simple things just seem incredibly painful. And then when you think about a career, you're doing these things over and over and over again, right? So if you can start to chip away at that friction and the waste, then you can look into the future and say, well, if I'm saving hours a week, that's years of my
Yeah.
life. I mean, to me, it's incredibly powerful. So that's
Yeah.
kind of motivated my career. And what brought me to the book was actually I really stumbled into this idea of value stream mapping by trying to solve flow problems. I didn't know anything
Hmm.
about value stream mapping. I'd heard of it, I learned about it in school, and it just kind of went over my head because I didn't have any
Yeah.
real motivation to apply it. And it honestly, it felt and looked overly complicated to me when I
Hmm.
learned it. So, but trying to solve these problems, I kind of fell into it, and then it just worked so well. It was just like magic. It was like there was the days before value stream mapping and then the days after the value stream mapping, and it's like this marker in
Yeah.
time where my whole thinking about work changed. And I felt this sense of empowerment, right? That I could have a major influence on how things were done. And so I started talking about it a lot. And I would talk about it in tech contexts. I'd talk about it with people who I knew in business, senior leaders. I mean, a magical thing about flow is that you can talk to anyone about it, right? It has this
Yeah.
resonance, whether you're in the C suite, if you're a board member, if you're
Yeah.
a random person on the street, everybody understands it to some degree.
Totally.
And that I think is also super, super powerful. So um, I actually met my co-author at an event where I was running a conversation on value stream mapping,
Hmm.
trying to share this idea with people and then get their thoughts on what makes it hard. Why don't we do this all the time? And he reached out to me afterwards and said, "What book would you recommend?" And there's some great books. Honestly, there's some
Yeah.
great books. And Karen Martin wrote kind of the modern Bible of value stream mapping.
Hmm.
And she wrote the foreword to our book.
Wow.
Because we're huge fans of each other's, and we've become great friends, which is wonderful. But we looked around at our cohort, right? Um, Software as a service, modern technology, digital first companies where there's no manufacturing component, and there wasn't really a book that spoke
Yeah.
directly to that audience, and especially this very minimal, very quick way that I learned to do value stream mapping on my own. So
Hmm.
Andrew Davis, my co-author, said, "Have you ever thought about writing a book?" He'd written a book before. He wrote a book on
Okay.
Salesforce for DevOps that was really successful, is still
Hmm.
really successful. It's kind of like the Bible for DevOps on Salesforce. And
Hmm.
so that kind of gave me the confidence. I knew I couldn't write it on my own. I don't have the diligence. Andrew's fantastic at getting things done and keeping us focused. So yeah, we took a swing at it, and a couple of years later, flow engineering popped out.
Well, life happens when you're planning other things.
Right.
And Steve, I mean, you just gave me a walk down my memory lane, and right in that moment, I was getting goosebumps because you mentioned it correctly, right? As engineers, or people who are tech savvy from the very get go. Like I was that kid who was tech support for
Mm,
my loved ones, my friends, and my neighbors. Any problem that they had, I was the one going and formatting their systems to,
hmm
just telling them how to use something. I think that's a wonderful thought, and now I can even like start seeing that idea of flow. And as engineers, anyway, we fascinate over this idea that once you make something, once you solve a problem, then it should just run. It should it should be on autopilot. It should just
mm,
run. And that power of flow is the feeling is so common. It's so liberating. It enables you to move on and do other things in life while you're still creating that value, creating that legacy that you have done. But when you're talking at an organizational level, and you are talking about the idea of flow, now you need to bring a change, right? And while we are at it, this show as well, it is dedicated to the theme of digital transformation. And the world is now under a serious pressure of transforming fast, because earlier the companies who were in digital transformation were only seeking cloud,
hmm
right? So they were moving from their old technologies to the modern technologies, cloud, and whatnot, the languages, the frameworks. But now they're also moving towards, hey, what can we add to our product that's AI, right? Because
hmm
every stakeholder wants it. So the pressure is humongous. Uh, the world will be spending $3.5 trillion in 2026 to just transform. And I think the idea of flow could really benefit them from what you have learned so far, right? So when you are dealing with so many organizations now, while as a speaker or as a consultant, or as an advisor, how do you encourage collaboration? Because it can be tricky, right? So when you talk about an idea which is abstract, many people will have different ideas. So how do you encourage good collaboration versus just collaboration, as you had also
mm.
mentioned in one of our chats, right?
Yeah, well, I think the thing that actually I think came out of this digital transformation, the first wave of it was this idea that we need to have more collaboration, right? Everyone was talking about we need collaboration between business and tech. And I think that's actually still happening, right? I mean,
Yeah.
that's still a work in progress. Uh, and we tend to think about collaboration as just always a positive thing. And what I've come to realize in organizations that I look at and we map and we start to measure, and I hear these experience stories from folks in the work, is that there's a ton of collaboration that's low value or negative value or one-sided value, right? So
Yeah.
that there's some group that's making demands on another group, and this could be branded as collaboration, but it's really just
Yeah.
interruption and distraction and disruption, right? So I think it's very important to think about, like, what kind of collaboration are we enabling in our organization? What's the value of the collaboration, and do we want to spend our collaboration dollars on this type of collaboration, right? Is it worth
Right.
it? Because we know, I think one of the things from the rise of cloud and SaaS is that there's so much that you can do with self-service, right? You think about what's possible. You could set up an entire business, an entire tech stack, multiple products in a portfolio. You could probably build an entire marketplace, including partnerships, without talking to
Yeah.
anybody. And
Yeah.
not that that conversation is low value, but the fact that you can do that without having to schedule a meeting and align your perspective with someone else who might have a completely different view from you, when you can do these things with automation and code and just having nice, clean interfaces to different capabilities, to me, that is optimal flow, right? If I can get what I want when I want it at whatever scale and frequency that is valuable to me, that is
Right.
peak flow. And it means that I can scale my business. I can protect my staff and my talent against being interrupted or being buried under
Yeah.
demands or work in progress. There's so many implications for that.
Yeah.
It's so powerful that I think we really have to, put a microscope to collaboration and really scrutinize, is this the type of collaboration that we want? Are we getting the value that we want out of this collaboration?
Yeah.
Would we be better off just creating self-service and helping people help themselves?
Yeah.
Because
Do
that's
you have a litmus? Do
fast.
you have a litmus for people who are listening to this? Do you have a litmus check for them to just evaluate and scrutinize the way you're saying any collaboration that, hey, is this worth my time or not? Do you have a litmus to it?
Well, yeah. So this really brings me to, the three main concepts of the book, value, clarity, and flow, are what we came back to over and over and over again. If we had to boil down the book to three big ideas, three ideas that you can really run in sequence or order of priority: value, the most important thing. And
Right.
that, to me, everything follows value. If I know what's most important, then I can hold that up against everything and say, is this helping me or is it not helping me? Right? Is this adding to value or is it taking away from
Mm.
value? Is this serving my needs or detracting from my needs? So I think that really the starting point to all of this work, and this work of understanding your environment, focusing, getting rid of distractions, enabling flow, it starts with value, because value is the thing that allows you to say no to everything else and really helps you focus on what's going to be most important. And you can put that up
Yeah.
against your collaboration and say, is this helping us reach the goal or not?
Yeah. Yeah. Because value is the only truth, and rest everything is the path is subjective, right?
I don't know. No, actually, I would say the opposite. Like, value is so subjective. This is one of the things, again, that I think is probably
Mm.
surprising. Like, what is, and this is one of the things that took me a long time to learn in my career, and I
Uh,
learned it the hard way, is that what you think is valuable only applies to you until you test it, until you
yeah.
validate that someone else, your boss, your customers, your
Yeah.
board, your colleagues, even your direct reports, right? Assuming that what you think is valuable is what they think is valuable is a big mistake. And I made that mistake many times until I learned to kind of step back and clarify and say, wait a second, let me just hear from you. What's the most important thing? What's the most important thing today? What's the most important thing for this week? What are
Yeah.
what are you worried about for the next quarter? I ask those questions of my clients every day. Every day I'm checking in and I'm calibrating, because the moment I think I know and I don't, I'm heading in the wrong direction. So I
Wonderful.
think it's so
Wonderful
important.
point.
It's so important to validate your assumptions about value.
You're absolutely right. But when you're driving consensus with, when you're holding up the value and saying that, is this collaboration required or not? What are we adding the value to? Um, and driving the consensus to value, don't you think that brings down to the root of many conflicts? And then people do have to, you know, circle back to an like the least common multiple of value of what they think and what the other person thinks.
This is a really interesting topic, and we touch on it in the book. There's
Yeah.
something there's something called the Abilene paradox. Have you ever heard about the Abilene paradox?
No, tell me about it.
So the Abilene paradox is basically it's about a story. It's a story actually, and the paradox comes out of the story. But the story is about a family that wants to go on a road trip, and they try to basically all come to a consensus. They all have different
Mm,
places they want to go, but in the service of the group, they all kind of compromise. They all kind of try to establish a consensus, and they end up going to Abilene. In the story, they go to this place called Abilene, and
mm,
nobody wants to go there, but it's the lowest common denominator. It's basically that everyone can agree that it's fine.
yeah.
We might as well go to this place, Abilene, because we can't agree to go anywhere that any one person wants to go. And I think
Right.
that's a big lesson for business and teams, is that you don't get to where you want to go by the lowest common denominator, right? You don't get to where you want to go as a group when you're trying to get perfect consensus. And I think that it's a big mistake. This is a part of like negative collaboration. When
Yeah.
we are trying to drive consensus, and we forget that the company has a mission, the company has a vision, it probably has goals.
Yeah.
Those are tiebreakers. Those are the things that we should
Yeah.
all be able to say, okay, well, forget about what we want. We're all trying to get to this. So let's stop horse trading and trying to drive consensus. And so one of the things I think is very powerful is that when we have one person with one goal, one person with another goal, instead of trying to meet in the middle, we meet
Yeah.
above. We meet in the
Yeah.
common value.
Multiple. Yeah.
Yeah.
So you just multiply, least common multiple instead of the denominator. But this is very powerful, Steve. And I mean, while even conversing with you, I'm learning so many things. Um, and of course, flow is a mindset. Engineering, especially, is a mindset. Um, but there are other attempts to you know increase productivity in your team and increase the efficiency of your team, like safe and DORA. Right? Safe, again, a methodology
Mm.
change, and DORA is there are four key metrics. Of course, middleware provides insights on both of them. um, they're widely known, but I mean, they still fall short somewhere today. Why do you think that's happening? I mean, why don't we have that standard set, right?
Mm. Well, I think that, one of the
Everyone's trying to
things,
invent their wheel again and again somehow.
yeah, yeah. Well, I think we're going to keep doing that until we get it right. And I think it's going to take a while,
Yeah,
but we keep trying. People keep picking, the new shiny thing and investing in it. And
yeah,
I think it's fair to go chase shiny things, but what I think is missing is a a foundation of principles and vision that allow you to take the shiny thing and hold it up against your values, your target, your mission, your roadmap, and say, does it fit? What's the value? What's the value for us? What do we expect to get out of this? I think a lot of people skip that step, right?
hmm,
And particularly with things like safe. Let's start with safe. So safe, it's one of the things that we looked at with flow engineering in the book, because there's value there. But a lot of people will get carried away with the fact that it's a very comprehensive, very prescriptive body of work, which means people tend to try to apply it directly to their organization and not pull the value out of it, right? And I think it's very important to say, okay, that's great as a reference. It's great as something that we can draw from. Let's hold it up against our targets, our roadmap, our vision, and pull what's valuable. And that's the missing step the missing step with DORA is that DORA is lagging metrics, right? It's metrics that result from actions.
Yeah.
And the focus needs to be on the actions, right? I mean,
Yeah.
really, DORA is a performance measurement about successful companies that says, based on your outcomes, the results of these metrics, here's how likely you are to correlate with a high performing or low performing
Yeah.
company. People forget the fact that there's all kinds of stuff that is leading to those metrics, that's driving
Correct.
those metrics, that's making those metrics move in one direction or another. And that's where the focus should be, right? If I'm looking
Absolutely.
at my
Focus should be on capabilities,
right,
not on the metrics, right?
right. I mean, you don't learn anything by looking at your bank account, right? What's
Absolutely,
showing up
man.
in your bank account is a result of all the actions that are happening beforehand. And so you can
Yeah.
watch it go up and down, and you might know, why it's going up and down. But if you want to influence it, you got to go upstream. You got to look at the leading indicators.
Yeah. You gotta search for cars and then look at your bank account, and then and then it might make more sense to look at that number. But the capability should be to buy something to make a change, and not just look at the bank balance and then buy a car.
you,
It
you
it doesn't work that way.
you definitely have to be thinking about what is the change that we want to make? What is the value that we're
Yeah.
trying to achieve?
Absolutely. And I think that's one reason that there are many different variants that people talk about. Whenever people are talking about metrics in engineering, people often bring Goodhart's law. But I mean,
Mm,
that's all true. That's always a, conversation extinguisher.
yeah,
That if you
right.
want to end that conversation, just mention Goodhart, just mention the G word. But essentially, engineering output is not related to business outcome in general
Hmm.
if you
Right.
start tracking metrics. And that's the core reason. That's why it fails every time. That's why you pick any sort of metrics, put a goal to it, and still you'll fail
Mm.
because the value is not connected. And hence, I totally agree with you that you have to connect that value. Whether engineering and product and business think differently, you have to arrive at the least common multiple, the and the multiple which all of which satisfies all of you. And I think I heard in another podcast that one of the very successful entrepreneurs, he was starting his third company, and the first thing that he did, even before hiring anyone, like before doing anything, he wrote down kind of the constitution of his company.
Mm.
What's the mission? What's the kind of culture he wants? What's what is appreciated? What is not appreciated?
Mm.
He just wrote down 50 fucking pages, which brings the guiding force for the team. They don't have to solve those problems again and again. So they solve the actual hard problems,
Hmm.
and and that's where the consensus comes in. So fantastic. Which now gives me a segue to one of the instances that you were sharing with me as a CTO of a fast growing startup, where you were building a data driven engineering culture from scratch. Tell us about that. How did that go? What were some of the bad decisions that you made
Mm.
that now you can look back and guide people to not do those mistakes, and then we can naturally talk about some of the good things that you did,
Right.
which people can again adapt in their current organizations.
Well, I think that the number one thing was ignoring the power of value, and that driving a clear dialogue about what is most important on a regular basis. I was working with a leadership team that was very short-term focused
Hmm.
and would change priorities constantly, which is very difficult as a
Yeah.
CTO. I mean,
Yeah.
Really, a CTO needs to be one step ahead of the business, building the capabilities that
Yeah.
will, fuel and power the go-to-market strategy, right? Fulfill customer needs. I don't think I was really aware of how critical that was. I really had no awareness of the landscape and thinking backwards from value to customer needs to capabilities to looking at a portfolio of technical
Mm.
capabilities, right? And since then, I think that's a very, very powerful way to
True.
think about technical leadership. Connect it all to what metric are we trying to drive? What's our North Star metric? And what are the leading indicators that will result in the outcomes that we're trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And work backwards from those outcomes. So basically, say, here's what we want to happen. What is going to tell us that we're making it happen?
Yeah.
And what is going to make those metrics move in the direction that we want them to move in?
Hmm.
That is all, maturity and knowledge that I've gained since. And I
Yeah.
think that the the alignment, so having, first of all, having a model for work, this idea of working backwards, I think, is a game changer. Absolutely. I would hold it up against above anything else that I've learned in business, in my career. The idea, just work backwards from what you want
Yeah.
and be very clear about what you want, and then engineer it backwards and do it with other
Yeah.
people. Validate your thinking, right? Basically say, here's how I see this. Tell me
Yeah.
what I missed. Where do you see it going wrong? Be very open and social about these things, because you want to, we talk about the importance of testing in writing code. We need to test everything all the time, right? We should always be testing things that we say, things that we
Yeah.
think, things that we do. So I think that, I was really immature in those aspects. And I think that aligning with my peers and my leadership group about, are we talking about long term right now? Are we talking about short term? Are we talking about high level, low level? Align those different perspectives, because you can so often have conversations where you're just talking past each other, because one person's talking
Correct.
about the details, one's talking about big picture, one's talking about short term, one's
Yeah.
talking about long term. One's talking about value, the other's talking about risk. So just try to get on the same page with people, be very clear about that. And then I
Yeah.
think also you have to craft a compelling vision. You've got to have that kind of manifesto. You got to lay out the way that you see the world and
Right.
give that to people, especially your team, right? As a leader, you've got to give people clarity, and in a way that they can ask questions about it and say, well, I don't really understand this piece. Like, that's so much better than having them just go off to work based on something you said, right?
Yeah.
And it holds you accountable as a leader to say, I wrote this thing down. I better stick to it, right? If I'm going to have integrity as a leader, if I'm going to be seen as someone who's trustworthy, who's an exemplar of the type of behavior that we want to see in
Yeah.
this organization, I have to hold myself accountable. I have to be clear. I have to be all of these things that I want from my team, from my peers, from my leadership. So I think there was aspects of that I have just developed and invested in since, because
Yeah.
there's so many opportunities to have
Yeah.
bad communication, bad collaboration, bad interaction patterns,
Yeah.
not setting boundaries and expectations. It really is, I think, kind of the art of leadership, and being in
Yeah.
a culture where you're not only trying to be a good peer, but be a good leader as well.
Yeah. Yeah. True that. And a lot of times when people are talking about different aspects as well, There's also a force of textbook play, right? So as you were mentioning in your earlier answer, that when people start implementing safe, they try to put down that uh, thought, or that practice right from the textbook.
Mm,
And there are so many forces, at, like putting friction, because whenever you have a certain goal, whenever a leader has even given that vision, the path to that vision is usually bespoke. You can't copy
hmm
what some other business has done right out of the textbook. Even if it was spoken at SaaStr, even if it was spoken at, let's say, reInvent or any of these conferences, you can't just apply them. But many times people just say that if we are similar to, like, if we are similar to company X,
right.
if this worked for X, it should work for us. But no, the context has changed, the markets have changed. We are a different kind of company.
Hmm.
We are a different group of talent. We have our own strengths. We have our own weakness. We have our own timing. And that was so well put, Steve. Um, Steve, why don't you tell us about, one of those times when you actually applied, uh, your flow engineering even before the book was launched, into resulting into real business value.
Well, I mean, this, yeah, we talked about it a little bit before. This kind of like, I don't know, this transition, this like awakening moment where I found this value of mapping and measuring, and
Yeah,
we're my last, the CTO position,
yeah,
fast growing startup, lots of demand. We're still trying to figure out, what works. So we had very little process, right? Very little kind of established, mature process. But so that's on one hand. On the other hand, we have lots of demand. There's a lot of people who want to try the product, lots of paying customers who want to get onboarded. So
right.
I was faced with a situation where we had a huge backlog of customers who were waiting to be onboarded to the platform. It was very heavily data centric, meaning we've got to ingest, normalize, clean up, correlate, map all their data into the system, which was no easy task.
Yeah,
But we looked at this backlog, 50, 60 customers, and we knew it was taking way too long. And so the job was, why is it taking so long? Is there anything that we
mm,
can do? So I worked with my team to basically build out a spreadsheet. And so the first value stream map that I really ever made was just a spreadsheet of what's happening, how long does it take, who's doing it, where does the information go, and we just filled it in. And we filled it in over the course of a couple different iterations to see some of the variance, right, the differences between different types of companies. But all of a sudden we could see these 3 4 opportunities that were just so obvious that we could just stop doing that day, right? Let's just do it this way, right? Instead of the way that we're doing it right now, what if we merge these 3 things together? So instead of handing off from one person to the next person to the next person and incurring a delay every time, just have that one person go all the way through, just flow through that entire segment of the value stream. And it was like night and day. And almost overnight, we dropped that process. So we didn't even know how long it took. But upon measuring it, right, we
yeah,
had like, we realized it's 6 months on average for this onboarding. And we shrunk it
mm,
down to 4 days. And it was just getting rid of all this wasteful activity that was happening, all these handoffs. And we wouldn't know, we'd all just have the sense that it was not good and that it was getting worse. But until you step away from the work and you actually map it out, you actually look at it,
Yeah.
you don't know what you're missing. And you don't know that the solution is probably right in front of your face and easier than you think. So that to me was just like, my mind was blown. I was completely changed from that moment on. And I wanted to map everything. Like I started to map our software development process, our sales process, our marketing campaigns. And we just saw these huge improvements. And there were just so many easy wins. So
Yeah.
that's it. Then I was on the flow train and I never got off.
Love it, love it. Even Sun Tzu in his Art of War, I don't know the verbatim quote, but he says that too. The like the leader of the military should never be in the field fighting.
Mm,
They should always be outside the field so that they can win the war. If they are in there fighting, they can't see the bigger picture.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
They can't see what's coming up. So I think that all the wisdom is now colliding into the idea of into the idea of value stream mapping. But Steve, I mean, so you spoke about, a particular department. You spoke about, adding flow to the teams by proving your leadership. How do you, differentiate tackling flow at a team level with an organizational level? Do you think it even exists at a team level? So, what I really mean to ask is that if I want to implement the flow mindset, do I have to go all the way up and then bring down the idea of flow to my particular
Mm.
local spot? Or can I start applying in my own little cocoon when I'm in an organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that it's something that is wonderful about flow is that it applies at every single scale, right? If you think about, I mean, you can even think about the flow of thoughts in your mind is a flow, right? It could be chaotic and turbulent, right? I mean, there could be a lot going on there.
Yeah.
But, the reason that people meditate, and one of the things that I think drew Andrew to this topic at an individual level, like Andrew was a Buddhist monk for 15 years. He knows,
Wow.
yeah, he knows mental flow, he knows personal flow. And when you talk about at that scale, the ability to focus and the ability to channel your thoughts and manage the flow of your thinking is a micro example. But if you scale it up and you talk about the individual on a daily basis, we have flow. We have flow throughout the day. We have flow for every
Yeah.
task that we're doing. At the team level, we have flow across individuals when we're handing work to each other, when we're picking things up that other people have put down because they're done with their piece. That flow can be anything from throwing something over a wall to having a relay race handoff of a baton, right? Anticipating, right, the
Yeah.
needs of your team members, practice, and enabling those handoffs. And then you scale up and you say, from team to team, we're handing work back and forth.
Yeah.
What does that look like? Is it someone throwing something over a wall? Or is it someone, stocking a vending machine that someone can just pull what they want whenever they want it? These are very different representations of flow and manifestations of flow at different levels. And then at the organizational level, we talk about major initiatives that people want to do, like, let's say, a wholesale integration of AI, for instance,
Yeah.
or the migration from one ERP system to another ERP system,
Right.
uh, absorbing a company that you acquired. All these things have a flow that you can either enable or you can ignore it,
Yeah.
right? It can get better if you invest in it, or it can get steadily worse. It will get steadily worse if you don't. And so to me, it applies at every single scale. And that is incredibly powerful, right? I mean, you think about tools that you can use in different contexts, when you can use one tool and it fits so well at all these different levels, and you can really use it as a mental model for looking at your work, looking at your life, even, right? Forget about work for a second. Think about what it's like to pursue your own goals.
Yeah.
Working backwards, measuring your progress, picking good metrics, establishing good communication and collaboration with people. These are all incredibly valuable capabilities. So that to me means like there's incredible value in investing in this.
Yeah, definitely. I think when you spoke about personal goals, I was just doing a one-on-one with one of my colleagues today, and that's the exact thing I told them, that don't try to chase the next position or the next project. Just try to understand what's the idea of happiness when you're like 20, 30 years down the lane. Define a day in your like imaginary world. Like leave all moral compass aside, right? No judgments. Just write down what kind of life are you chasing, and assume that you will be able to achieve all that. And once you have defined that, now start going 5 years backwards by saying that, okay, let's say at 60 I want this kind of life. So what kind of life do I have at 50, let's say, right? And then 45, 40. So until you reach your age, and then you align whether I'm on my right track for my happiness or not. And I did this exercise multiple times in my life and my career, and I took my career choices like that. So yeah, I think I've been a student of your concept even before meeting you, and that's always very liberating, because now you know from a first fundamental principle that you are going to achieve your goal, or even if you don't, then you know why not.
I think that's very powerful. Like, something that you touched on, that and people will say, well, how can you know, right? How can you know? How can you pick something in the future that hasn't happened yet and use that as a guide? And it's fair to ask the question, but what's remarkable about what we see, and we hear about all these successful people and patterns of achievement, and there's a magical thing that happens when you set a vision for the future. You're more likely to make that happen than leaving it to random chance, or focusing on the short term and wondering whether you're going to end up where you would be happy not having a vision. And it's the same as if we stand on the top of a hill. Are we going to end up in a better place if we pick a mark on the horizon and head towards it? Or if we just look down at our feet and step one step in front of the other? And we know that this doesn't work, right? And we know that just focus on the short term. You can't even ride a bike if you're looking directly underneath you, right? You got to look forward. So it's something I think that's kind of fundamental to life that we often forget because we get caught in the day-to-day, in the weeds, in the details.
Yeah, wonderful. I think this conversation is turning down into like the close your eyes and take long breaths. But while I can't even express how relatable this conversation is going around. But from a tactical standpoint, when we are talking about an enterprise, right? Where should they start? Because there's so much chaos. There are so many agents of change, but there are also so many agents of friction. And sometimes two agents of change are adding friction to themselves. So when you're talking to an organization, an enterprise, uh, what's the first place to start, and what mental model should they apply to, like, to arrive at a point where they can map it out, and
Hmm.
you know walk us through the tactical pathways to for an enterprise to start applying the flow principles.
Yeah, it's simpler than I think a lot of us would imagine,
Hmm.
because when we think about things and we think that they're complicated, this is another mental thing, right?
Yeah.
It will just automatically, intrinsically get overburdened with the thought of how much work there is to do and how much there needs to change. But I think the first step that's the most important is to step away from what you're doing, right? Think about it from a distance and realign yourself to the value, right? Look for the
Hmm.
value, find the value, focus on that value, and try to clarify it as much as possible. Try to really understand, okay, that's the corporate strategy. That uh, is somewhat connected to the IT strategy, and I'm inside of this department inside of IT. How am I connecting the dots?
Yeah.
Um, and you can use that to really, I think, start really good conversations with people about how do you see all these things connecting? What do you think is the most important thing that will enable that value to happen, right?
Right.
To help us achieve that outcome that we're pursuing. And
Yeah.
working backwards from that to understand, okay, if that's our target, let's understand where we are today, our current state, our baseline. That could be visually, right? Let me just map out some stuff. Let's drop a bunch of items onto a canvas and try to connect them together, group similar things, place things that seem like they're in conflict against each other, and try to figure out, okay, how can we break this conflict? How can we get out of this situation where we
Yeah.
want this, but we also want this opposing thing? These are very important things, because if we can't resolve them, if we can't resolve conflicts, if we can't map out value to outcomes to actions, our
Yeah.
day to day, our brains are just going to shut down, right? It's like
Yeah.
you can't operate without clarity. You can't act
Yeah.
without clarity, right? So, like, because your brain doesn't just want to do random things. We have to
Yeah.
build a sense of clarity. So for me, value first, clarity second, flow follows all of that. You cannot have flow unless you have value and clarity figured out. So a lot of folks will
Wonderful.
say, we got to get flow. We got to start measuring flow. We got to,
Yeah.
move to Kanban, or we need to start, adopting some specific methodology, measuring a specific thing. But you can't do any of that in isolation, right? It's got to be anchored to
Of
the
course.
most important
Always.
thing in your context.
Yeah. Always. And Steve, once someone has actually applied flow the way you did, and just chopped off many months from your onboarding process, what happens afterwards? How do you recommend using the modern metrics, especially in the case of engineering teams? How do you
Hmm.
recommend applying data when you have already applied flow and you have fixed the problem? How do you recommend using DORA metrics, um, sprint flow metrics, especially in the engineering teams, to ensure that once someone has made a change, the teams are able to follow that?
Yeah, I think that one of the things that is great about mapping is that you get to keep it as an artifact, right? You can use it as a reference, and you can actually develop it over time, right? You can keep updating the map as the landscape changes, because the landscape will change. If you're improving things, the process changes. We get rid of things, we run things in parallel, we redesign value streams all the time. And so that means the metrics change. That means our expectations change. But that's that's par for the course. If you want change, if you want improvement, things are going to change. Luckily, once you've run through it once, updating is really just a question of let's do a quick check-in to validate our assumptions and update anything that's changed. And I think that the most important thing to measure is, again, always working backwards from what do we want? What do we want to see? What's the change that we want to drive? And then what do we think? And when I say what do we think, I think another aspect of that that's important to highlight is that we are making bets when we say we're going to measure something. We think that by measuring that, that we're going to be able to track its progress, and it's going to influence us in a positive way to drive us to that outcome. That's another reason why we need to have balanced metrics, right? A lot of people will pursue velocity on its own. They pursue quality on its own. When you pick any metric in isolation, right, what are you going to get? You're going to get progress, but you might not see the progress that you want, right? You're going to see people forget about everything else that needs to be measured. You're going to see some of those measures go in the wrong direction. And that can be fine, but you got to be clear about we're going to pursue faster throughput, and we're going to tolerate a loss in quality, right? Because we're prioritizing. And I think that to me is a function, being able to make those decisions. It's a function of that clarity that is enabled by that clear understanding of value.
So my last question is that now with the org architecture changing, so many AI agents coming into picture, remote work already there. Some companies are trying to do RTO, but broadly there's AI agent, hybrid work culture, and on top of and this is all on top of the chaos that enterprises bring in with themselves for free, right? So now, what's your idea of looking at flow and applying flow principles in this changing org architecture? What's your crystal ball prediction of how can we leverage AI agents to our use to maximize flow, or how do you see AI agents and the adoption of AI, not just agents, but adoption of AI in a lot of workflows, adding friction to flow?
I think that, it definitely add a lot of friction. A lot of people try to sprinkle in AI and it just add a layer of noise, right? A layer of complexity to what they're already doing. And that's going to have a very significant cost. But you touch on, two things that might seem distant from each other: AI agents and remote work. And I actually see these things as somewhat related. Like, I think that if we're talking about the landscape of contribution, right? Let's say that AI agents are one aspect of contribution and talent is another aspect of contribution. AI agents are potentially another source of talent, right? Another source of capability and contribution. And what do you need in any of these scenarios? I think you need a tighter definition of policy, a tighter definition of governance. When you think about what it takes for Uber to bring anybody around the world in to be a driver, right? What it takes for a random person to use their car to transport people and have Uber liable for the consequences. That's, I think, where we're headed with a lot of work where we have very poor definition of what's expected, how to play the game, how to be a part of the system, how to contribute, and then what are the, expectations and rules and guidelines that are governing what good looks like. And to me, it's very important to be clear about how we make it easy to do the right thing and hard to do the wrong thing in a way that's not overly onerous, right? Too much friction because there's too many rules, right? And it's too much to manage. So I think that what we'll start to see, and what's kind of interesting about AI agents, is that now we have to define all these policies. We have to basically say, in this scenario, do this. Don't do this under any circumstances. This is what good looks like. This is the goal. These are the metrics. Here's how to act under certain circumstances.
Yeah.
This is stuff that we really should have defined for people a long time ago. And people just put up with it, right? We just make do.
Yeah.
We just, because we're adaptive, right? We can roll with the punches. We don't know what good looks like. A lot of people don't know what they're missing. They're comfortable with uncertainty. They're comfortable with a lack of clarity. They're comfortable not knowing what is the most valuable, important thing.
Yeah.
But this all gets in the way, right? The more clarity we have around these things, the more we're able to operate autonomously at scale and have contributions from all kinds of participants, right? Whether it's partners, external partners, the new hire who just joined, the person who's been at the company forever, but the company's changed now, AI agents, all these things are just contributions. And I think we really have to understand, what does it mean to contribute and how do we do that well?
Right. Wonderful. Wonderful. Thank you, Steve. I mean, that was a wonderful answer, and that was a cherry on top of a wonderful episode. I can't even express, my excitement even after the whole recording. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, time, and the whole feeling of flow with us. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're very welcome. Take flow with you, and feel free to meditate on it. Like, I think it's a very positive thing.
Yeah, and with that, of course, we'll be mentioning Steve's Substack link, the link to the book, in the description. So please go and check it out.